And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 220. Today we're going to be talking about, well, two different topics in fact. We've got the after dark, the idea of looking at sort of nighttime photography, and we're also looking at the food photography. Both of these, though, are going to have something of a seasonal edge to them, given the months and season we happen to be in. So stick around, join us, let's make a start. So yes, welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 220. If you happen to be watching live, then leave a comment. Let me down below, or over in the comment section. Let me know where you are from, let me know what the weather's doing, and join in the general chat. And we can make a start. If you don't happen to be watching live, then you can still leave a comment down below. It's just I won't be able to. Obviously I won't see it here as this is going out live. Yes, so I can see we've got a couple of comments in already. Let's take a quick look. Oh, Nadia joins us, says, hi everyone from a cold but bright Fife. Yes, it kind of is bright outside at the moment, but I've still had to close the blinds and switch the light on because it will be dark in probably about 15 minutes. So I figured I'm probably better off not sort of having to leap up and swap all the lighting around halfway through the podcast. April says, greetings from a cold Long Island, New York. Susan says, hello from Kukubri, where it is also cold but bright at the moment. Janet joins us from a chilly Mississauga. And Marilyn says, hello from a cold Colorado. Sandra joins us and says, hello everyone from a rainy, windy Birmingham. And Becca says, hi, just made it. Been trying to clear and clean the flat first. It looks worse than it did when I started. Oh, it nearly always does. It's got to, whenever you're tidying up, it always looks a lot worse before it gets better. That's true. It says, weather cold but sunny, going to grab a cuppa. Oh, Fiji's joined us. Hello, friends. Summer in winter. Yes, because in Chennai in southern India, not got to worry too much about frost or snowfall or those generally cold blasting winds. Conversations I've had with Fiji before now is if it drops as low as something, say, like 24 degrees C, which here is positively a heat wave, they in India they all start getting really chilled and wondering how many extra sweaters they need to get out. Right, where are we at then? So yes, here we are. We have topics, we have people, we have a podcast. So let's make a start. So actually what we'll do first of all is we'll just do a Smug Points update. So Smug Points Leaderboard is currently sitting at, where are we? Well, basically everyone who turned up last week for December, there wasn't really any other opportunities last week to earn Smug Points beyond turning up and saying hello. So everybody who turned up and said hello last week got 5 Smug Points. So for December, everybody's kind of sitting at an even level. Where else? But for the annual Smug Points accumulation, now this is where it's all at now, because we've only got December left. We've only got 3 more weeks after this to accumulate Smug Points to see if you could be a winner. And at the moment, VG is way out there ahead. She is currently sitting on 640 accumulated Smug Points across the course of the year, making her the one who has contributed most in terms of whether it's turning up, saying hello, entering challenges, putting stuff in for critique. Second is Robert on 555, Robert Gullick, that is, from Texas. Third is April on 545, so just 10 points between the two of them. And Susan is just joining in at 500 points. So it's a close one. Sandra and Janet are still in the 400s, outside possibility. Possibly not. However, you still have the chance to win the most accumulated Smug Points for December. So do stick with that. And we've been running these Smug Points for the year, and it's kind of been fun. I think it's added an extra level to it. I'm planning on taking Smug Points into next year as well. But if you have any ideas on how you would like to see the Smug Points develop, or other ways of kind of anything else that really contributes. We're going to be going to a new year, new starts, new ideas. I'm absolutely welcome to in fact, I would very much welcome your input. I mean, I make all the guesses and I try and put things out there. Some things work, some things maybe work not quite so well. But if you have ideas, send them to me. Let me know. This whole podcast only exists because we make it up as we go along. I decided on doing it 4.5 years ago. And it carries on, and it's gone through various changes over the years. But nothing is written hard in stone. So if you have suggestions, if you have ideas, if you have thoughts about things you would like to see in the podcast, directions you would like to see it going, then let me know. I would really welcome your input. This podcast isn't just about me sitting here talking, it's about you. It's about giving you feedback. It's about helping you develop your photography. So your input is not just appreciated, but absolutely essential to this podcast. Without you, the viewers, without you, the interactors, there would be no podcast. It would just be me talking into a camera, probably feeling very lonely and giving up. So keep your input coming. Oh, we have a couple more people who joined us. Oh, Adrian's back, says, afternoon all from a distinctly not sunny, but bright southern Lincolnshire. Very wet and rainy. Sorry, not sunny or bright. Southern Lincolnshire. Very wet and rainy. Glad you could join us, Adrian. John Harvey says, good day all. Meg says, hello everyone. And Robert has actually joined us, saying howdy all from Texas, raining and droll. I don't know whether you just caught there, Robert, about the fact that you are second on the leaderboard for the annual Smug Points accumulation. But if you want to catch Fiji, you're really going to have to submit and to the challenges and possibly to the feedback session if you want to be in with a chance. Oh, Nick's joined us from Bath and says hello all from the West Country. Excellent. All right, so where shall we make a start then? So that's where we were with the Smug Points. So today then we are going to look at two different topics. We're going to look at the notion of after dark. It's the first one, and then we're going to look at the idea of food photography, and both of these are because I'm going to be setting challenges for later this month. Still in December, we are going to have an After Dark challenge, and we are going to have a seasonal food challenge as well. So today is about giving you some ideas, giving you options, just a couple of thoughts about how you might set up your camera, all these kind of things, example photos. So again, if you have questions, keep them coming. If you have comments on any of the photos that I stick up, drop them into the comments. And if you happen to, or you have any extra thoughts, or you have any questions, absolutely questions, ask the questions and I will do my best to answer them and help as the podcast goes on. So let's make a start then. So what we're going to start with then is this notion of after dark. So this challenge idea came from Susan in Kakubri. Susan won the most accumulated Smug Points for November, so got to set the December challenge. So she decided to, for this idea of after dark, one is saying, well, given the fact that it's kind of, well, for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere or further north in the Northern Hemisphere, knowing that Fiji is in Chennai, is in the Northern Hemisphere, but not that it makes that much difference to light and dark. The nights have drawn in. We're only 2 weeks away from the solstice, or less, thereabouts. So we're coming into the darkest part of the year. But we also happen to be in the holiday, full-on holiday season. So of course there's Christmas, the biggie for a lot of us, but there's also Hanukkah and Kartigai, I think, in India. I'm not sure whether you're past that, but essentially I think it's something like about, is it 27 or 47 different festivals celebrated pretty much over December. Part of the reason why Happy Holidays has become more common way of just greeting people. It's not that you're not allowed to. I keep seeing these things where people say, oh, we're not allowed to say Happy Christmas anymore. It's what absolute nonsense. Of course you're allowed to say Happy Christmas. Nobody's preventing you from saying Happy Christmas, but you can also say Happy Holidays. So where are we? So I was about to come back from diverting off on a rant there. After dark. So yes, after dark. So what are we going to talk about here? So I'll tell you what, let's make a little start here with, I'm going to start with the notion of one way that we can think of with after dark is you don't have to even step outside. You could sort of just in the house, straightforwardly, something like lighting a candle. Okay, this has this notion of, okay, the dark has happened, the night is drawing in, whatever. These kind of candles on the inside or lights of some kind. So look around the house. What signifies to you the idea of after dark? You know, when you have drawn the blinds, drawn the curtains, settled down for the evening, or up in the middle of the night, or anything like that. There's that notion of what can you maybe do around the house. So just this kind of starting point, this idea here, almost kind of macro level. And just to let you know, I remember playing around with this one, trying to catch the flame is really, it's one of those things where you've got to have quite a fast shutter speed. And just a point of reference on this one is that I had 2,000th of a second to try and get the fuzz, or the fizz from the, as you strike the match. So 2,000th of a second this was taken at in order to get this level. This was at f4 and it's still at ISO 800. So if you're going to play around with matches and dark, it's then, you know, understand that a high shutter speed is really where you're needing to go. But although, having said that, that kind of belies the fact that by and large, when we are playing around with the idea of after dark, darkness very rarely allows us to actually have something like a high shutter speed. And to fall into a kind of a technical level first, generally speaking, and of course there are exceptions, but generally speaking, darkness tends to mean we have more problems with trying to get the kind of light levels we need to get a decent photograph. Photography is all about light coming through a lens and hitting a sensor or hitting a film. You know, if you're using an analog, you know, fine, you're hitting film. If you go way back, you're hitting a glass plate with coatings on it. Or in these modern days, you're hitting some kind of digital sensor, whether that's in your phone or it's in your digital camera. So, but the light is hitting the sensor. And if you don't get enough light in, everything gets too dark. Now, most modern phones will sort all that lot out for you. But if you're using your DSLR or a mirrorless camera, some kind of handheld digital camera, then you generally tend to need to make adjustments. And there's 3 ways you can make adjustments to allow more light to come in when it's darker. The first is aperture. So with aperture, basically, you go for a smaller f number. The smaller, so an f2.8 gives you a wide aperture, whereas an f16 gives you a very narrow aperture. And the narrower the aperture, the less light is getting in. The wider the aperture, the more light can get into the camera to hit the sensor. So you want to have more light if you can. So wide aperture, quite often, that's the way you're going. Sometimes though, even though you've got a really wide aperture, or perhaps there's a shot you want where you don't want the wide aperture, because the problem with the wide aperture is a narrow depth of field. So this bit in the foreground might be in focus, but that bit in the background is going to be out of focus. You can play that to your advantage, or it might not be what you're wanting. So there are other things you can do. The next thing, the big thing that probably most of us think of, is the idea of a slower shutter speed. So a slower shutter speed means that when you go click, the shutter is open for longer, more light gets in. When you allow that to happen, you can generally cope with a darker situation. More light comes into the lens, you can get it. But the problem with a slow shutter speed is if you knock or wobble that camera, then it's likely to blur. So you need to work out, if you are going to hand hold your camera, what's the slowest you can get it without hand wobble taking an effect. Now for me, personally, I don't like to have hold a camera anything less than 100th of a second. That's about as low as I would go. And really I'm more comfortable at 160th of a second if I don't want to feel I've got hand wobble. But if I've got to go below 100th of a second, I'll be thinking tripod. Okay, and at this point, whether it's a full-on tripod which you've screwed your camera to, or that notion of a bean bag sitting on a wall or something like that, or just resting on a few books, angled with other little kind of homemade bits of gear or whatever to get what you want. Now, if you start getting much below about a 20th of a second, the other thing to remember with a slow shutter speed is the fact that actually pressing the camera itself to set it off can also cause the camera to wobble and cause it to blur. So once you start getting below 20th of a second, below 10th of a second, probably best to stick the camera on a timer. So a 2-second timer will allow you to go click, stop, the camera will just wobble for 1 second, then it will settle, and then when it goes off, you've not got the actual camera movement itself causing any kind of blur. So long exposure, usually some kind of shutter, so slow, longer shutter speed. You're wanting it to be on some kind of tripod or beanbag or resting on something. And your third way is ISO. So generally speaking, you want the clean. If you have the lower your ISO number, so an ISO of 100 or 200 tends to give you a very clean image. A high ISO, 2000, 4000 tends to give you a noisier image, but it does allow you to shoot in lower light. So with all these kind of combinations, you're always playing a trade-off. You could have a wide aperture to let in more light, but it doesn't give you as much depth of field. You could have a slow shutter speed, but you're more likely to get blur. And you can have a high ISO to let in more light, but the picture tends to be noisier. So that combination tends to be part of what you as a photographer are training in. If you are manually operating your camera, you're constantly trying and playing with these things. So play with it and just see where you go, because actually getting ahead in and doing it is the best way to learn. Now, I'm just thinking here, I've not got, nope, didn't mean to do that. Didn't mean to do that. Right, I've got my, what am I wanting to do? I'm wanting to refresh that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I've got my tablet down on the side and it's it's not playing well with me here. So I'm just going to try and refresh the thing. Okay, April says, don't like it. What don't you like, April? I seem to have missed something here. Has something else been said? Is it that you don't like the dark, or you don't like the picture that I just had up? Anyway, okay. Nadia says, I take off my camera strap to stop the wind catching it and causing the camera to move during the capture. Well, if you're in a windy place, that's not a bad thought either. However, it is also worth mentioning that sometimes you can use your camera strap just to give you slightly more steadiness. If you're getting down to a slightly slower shutter speed, one of the things you can do is, if you've got the camera strap on and you really tug it so it's tight against your neck, you can kind of use your body more as the tripod, and you'll get yourself an extra couple of degrees of lower shutter speed. Adrian says, assume April means the weather or the night's drawing in. Right, okay. Right, okay, so that notion then that for night photography, after dark can mean in the house. What happens as it starts getting darker outside, and so the house starts getting darker? That's one way of going about your interpretation. Traditionally, I suppose, what we start thinking of with nighttime photography is very much like going out. And that might be going out to a remote place. In this case, this is Loch Ken, which is a little bit about 10 miles or so, or maybe 8 or 9 miles north of where I live. Done at night. Now, my settings for this one. Now, I used an f3.5, which is gives you a narrow depth of field. However, something worth remembering is that if you're not worrying about anything in the foreground, if you're just shooting at the end, so you're shooting on a horizon, a kind of infinite distance, then actually you can go for a fairly wide aperture, because your focal point is so far away that it's not making any real depth difference. The closer the object is, or the subject is, to your camera, the more that depth of field is going to have an impact. And then this one was shot at 20 seconds. So this was on a 20-second timer. And I was using a wide angle lens on this as well. What we could see is, as I zoom in, the stars, the world has turned a fraction in that 20 seconds, just enough to make some of these stars at the edge of as we go further out towards the edge of the lens, there's more of a smear. So we don't have a dot of light, we have a smear of light. Whereas in the kind of center of the image, they're rounder. As we go out towards the edges, they streak across the sky. So long exposure, wide aperture, trying to get a nighttime shot like that. Sandra says, lovely starry night. April says, tranquil photo. What else can you do? Yes, of course, you can also, if you want, playing around with slightly longer exposures and what have you, you can get a little bit creative. I had little while ago, I had just a wee bit of fun with something like this, setting up the camera in the back of the car. This one was done, this was a 13-second exposure time, f-stop 7.1. I wanted to be so that I could have the outside of the car in focus as well as the inside, the lights and the dashboard. And then this idea of being lit up by the headlights themselves. Just a little bit. In fact, actually, I've got a funny feeling. I took this a couple of years ago, or 3 years ago, in fact. And actually, if I remember rightly, I thought even though I had a wide angle lens, I couldn't, from the back seat, I couldn't actually fit in everything. So I ended up opening up the boot, what do you call it, the trunk, anyway, the hatchback in the car, and actually had the tripod behind the car looking in so that I could get both headrests and make it look so it feels like you're sitting in the back of the car, but I was in fact actually behind the car to take this shot. So you can have a little bit of fun with things like that. I think the shot caught me just kind of running into view here. You can see my face sort of slightly smearing across. So that notion of after dark, if you want, use car headlights. You can kind of play around. Another idea here is if you go now, mist, yes, mist, fog, nighttime, street lights. This is always a good one if you've got a kind of misty night. And for this one here, I was out handheld. I had it at an 80th of a second, which is as slow as I wanted to possibly be. But it's an ISO 6400. It's on an older camera of mine, and 6400, you're really feeling it. There's a lot of noise. But by turning it into black and white, one of those tricks we've talked about before, black and white quite often changes noise to grain. It's still noise, but it emulates much more that notion of grain like we used to see in old black and white film and so sometimes you can kind of get away with it. It feels slightly more moody and atmospheric. So as we zoom in, you can see that it's much more, but because it's foggy as well, it sort of works. It's got that kind of moody, mysterious kind of feel to it. So the street lights, when you get, first of all, it diffuses into the fog, but then what also happens is they get fainter and fainter as they disappear into the distance. So if you can get nighttime and fog and then a series of lights, that's always a really fun one to kind of have as well. What did we say? Oh, a couple more comments. VG was saying lovely and serene. I think that was to do with the previous one on the lock. April says we do not get misty nights as often. Sometimes we get lucky, but I do like this kind of picture. And Adrian says the noise / grain makes it appear to have heavier water droplets. This is true. It kind of does kind of add that kind of feel to it. It gives you that extra excuse. Right. Well, another thing you can do, if you happen to have a garden, you can always step out into your garden. So, for example, there is something, especially if you're sort of slightly in that blue hour where there's maybe still a little bit of light left in the sky. This one I took, was it just a couple of weeks ago? In fact, I think it was last week. It was last week after I'd done the podcast. I went out into the garden. I was at the back of the garden. I turned round and I had my phone on me and I took a photo back down the length of the garden. And the lights have come on in the house. The lights have come in on the houses next door and the door after, and into the hotel. Over on the right here, there's a hotel that runs down by the side of us. So what happens then is you get people have got their lights on in their houses, but there's still maybe a little bit of light in the sky in the background. I'll just point out actually here, just to give you a sort of sense. There's a little top of a monkey puzzle tree coming out here. I mention that because I'm going to come back to that afterwards. Kind of part of the layout of Castle Douglas High Street, the town I live in. So yeah, you can turn around. You can just shooting in the garden, looking back at the houses or the back of houses or things like that could be quite an interesting way of playing around with that notion of after dark as well. And to go back to an old favourite of mine from 3 or 4 years ago. In fact, this was 4 years ago, almost to the day, in fact. This is the shed in our garden. And this was during lockdown in 2020. And Maggie, my wife, decided to decorate the shed for it. Because what we've been doing, what had become a key part of our life, was what we call shed cafe. Being stuck in lockdown, being stuck in the house day in, day out, there was a feeling of a need to leave the house. So we fell into a habit during lockdown of actually every morning we would take our coffee out to the shed. We would go and have our coffee sitting in the shed, and it didn't matter whether it was freezing cold or it was boiling hot, or whether it was whatever the wind was, the weather was, we would go and sit in the shed and have our coffee. And it became this little sanctuary. And as a little bit of fun over Christmas, Maggie then decorated it. She'd got some twigs and branches from the garden. I think I cut them off the hedge at the back, the trees at the back, and she strung them with lights, and we strung lights around the shed, and she made a little wreath, put lights onto that, and then on one of the days running up to Christmas, we went out there with our daughter Meg and had a lovely hot chocolate and made a kind of a wee event of it. So that at this point we are now starting to get into the notion of seasonal lights. So that was a lovely kind of thing. So, in the garden, one way we're looking back at the house, another way, we've lit up the shed. So that notion of after dark, then you can play around with in the garden. But that notion of special occasion as well, where things are really happening. Now, last year, I went down to Devon. My brother unfortunately died, and I was down at the funeral. But one of the things my sister did while I was down there for a few days was we raced off because she wanted to show me there's a train that runs between Paynton and Kingswear down in South Devon. And in the winter, they light up the whole train. And so you've got all these strings, all these lights running across the train, and it's a steam train. It's one of these fun little things to go along. And then the steam is coming out of the train, and it's getting lit up. All the smoke becomes coloured by the light as it's running through. Now, the place where we happened to be at the time, we weren't sure whether we were going to get there on time. We were running down the path to try and get there, and I just managed to shoot off a couple of quick shots with my phone. No, I haven't even got the big camera here, just a quick couple of shots with the phone. But I did manage to get this, and it's a bit of fun. So that notion that sometimes there are events going on, sometimes there are particular things going on which are seasonal, which are making the most of lights, so that lights in the dark is something else to consider. If you happen to have anything going on in the place that you live, consider that as a way of looking for interesting after dark things. Again, play around with your camera, try and have a sense of your camera settings before you go, so that, because if you've got something that's fast moving like this, by the time you've gone click and it's not worked and you've worked out your camera settings, it's gone. However, sometimes we're back to the idea of rely on the phone, because the phone will, or your straightforwardly your auto settings on your camera. Sometimes it's just quicker to do that if you don't have the luxury of the time to sort of sit there and make adjustments. Now, okay, so what have we got? There's another comment or a couple of comments here. Susan says, love your shed cafe idea. April says, love seasonal lights. Vici says, wow. Sandra says, love the festive train. Vici says, the steam's so colourful. Adrian says, love the train shot, beautiful. Marilyn loves the train shot. Vici says, reminds me of our Holly festival. Holly or Holy, Holi festival. Meg says, I really like the diagonals of the train and also the steam. April says, Adrian, I hate winter and when it gets dark early. That's what you were talking about earlier then, April. Yes, okay, you hate it. It's the winter you hate. I only like the weather from May to October in New York. And Becca says that neon lights make for a really good image. So, great if we've got that kind of thing. But also, a lot of towns and villages have Christmas lights along the street. And so you could do something like an isolated shot. Again, so just, I went out with my phone camera just a few days ago. Castle Douglas has updated the lights, and just something as simple as this, where we've got Christmas lights attached to the overhead lights, and just playing around, taking a little quirky angle, get a nice sort of strong diagonal, little burst of light. There's nothing intensely amazing about this. It's not the kind of thing you would print out and hang on the wall. But if you are talking about the kind of guru shots, photo crowd, view bug kind of contest where they're saying something like Christmas lights or simple lights or something like that, then something like this with a nice strong diagonal, a little burst of light, can usually do quite well. So something to play with. Another thought here as well with lights is to go back to that notion of the blue hour. So after dark, really what we're talking about is after the sun's gone down. So for the after dark challenge, I will certainly accept blue hour. It doesn't have to be completely black skies. And it's something like that. This one was taken a couple of years ago. So this is back in 2021. And so this was the old lights that Castle Douglas had. But sun's gone down. Incredible colours across the sky, but at the same time the lights have come on. So we can see here we've now got the Christmas lights starting to come out. You see them kind of as they go down the street, and even in some of the shop windows they've now started getting their lights up. So you can, the blue hour in towns and cities in an urban environment is a really kind of an interesting one where you get the contrasting light. It's now too dark. It's so dark that the shops have had to stick their lights on, but there's still potentially light in the sky. And in this case, this light in the sky is also reflecting off the buildings somewhat, as well as giving us this glorious red reflection off the clouds here. Sandra says beautiful sunset. So that's one way of playing with it. Of course, you can wait until it's a little bit darker as well. So this one, when I went out the other day, so to come back, remember I said about that monkey puzzle tree that you could see from the back garden? This is the same monkey puzzle tree, only from a slightly different angle. So this is Castle Douglas Library here. And just outside the library, they have the town Christmas tree. And so actually this is more or less out my front window. So my house is just to the left here, and as we look out the window I can see the monkey puzzle tree, I can see the library, and I can see the Christmas tree. So perfect place to be for the Christmas festivities. But you can also see here are lampposts with the lights attached. So that idea of go and stand in the street, get a sense of where the lights are coming from, that is a kind of fun way to be. Likewise, this notion of turning around. I wandered down the street a little bit. So this is actually, it's almost the same. It's slightly further down. To give you a reference point, here's the clock tower at the bottom end of the street. Now, if I go back to here, here's that very same clock tower. Now, the shot that I've just taken, instead of standing this side of this barrier here, I'm standing probably roughly where that person is, as I then look down the street here. Okay. Now, the other thing about this is what I've done is see this. This is like it's just a bin, a trash bin, a waste paper, but it's got what I did. There's another one right in front of me here, and then I rested my phone literally onto the thing so that I could keep it steady. And then I did a long exposure shot. The phone has a long exposure option on it, and I managed to get some nice car trails running along as well. So you can play with that. Obviously it's darker sky, still a tiny bit of blue left, but we can also see now we're getting the Christmas lights into the shot as well. Now, Castle Douglas is a very small town, population of about 3,000. If you happen to be living in the bright lights of the city, then you are going to have lights all over the place, and there's going to be lots of major opportunity here. Another thing to think of, though, is even if you don't live in a large city, there are sometimes you get particular. Now, I don't have any examples to show you here, but you also sometimes get particular houses. There are a couple of places around here where every Christmas they go absolutely wild. There's a house in a village along the road towards Dumfries where their entire garden is full of these kind of inflatable snowmen, reindeers, Father Christmases that are all lit up, and it's got lights running across the gutters and around the house and everything. And they've just gone, sod it, we're just plastering every spare bit of space we can with Christmas lights and decorations. And it stands out because it's just unlike anything else in the entire village. So that notion, then you can go and take photos of what's in the town, but you can also go and, you know, see what your neighbours are up to. I know I've done competitions in the past, like when we did Halloween challenge. Sometimes one or two people have put in again the kind of amazing structures and garden decorations and scenes that their neighbours have created as well. So that's another kind of after dark seasonal kind of idea. You can, of course, if you want as well, play around, go black and white. I mean, there was the black and white misty scene. This one actually is black and white Christmas scene. You know, so the church, the local church here, they've actually got Christmas tree sitting out the front of it. They've got Christmas lights on the path running up to it, a little bit running over here. So now, it's an interesting one when you go black and white, because of course mostly what we tend to think of with Christmas is the colours with the lights. You know, most of them tend to be really bright and colourful, and adding light and colour into what is otherwise the darkness of winter. But if there are strong lights about the place, sometimes you also get strong shadows. And so don't forget, so if you have a tendency or a desire to go black and white, you can do that as well. Something else to play with. Oh, okay, so a couple of comments. What's this? Adrian says, blimey, that is huge, the monkey puzzle trees. Sandra says, lovely festive shop. VG says, don't know what monkey puzzle means, but amused. Okay, it's a kind of tree. Okay, let's just flip back a moment. So there's a particular kind of tree, and it's just called a monkey puzzle tree. And if it's got another, it's probably got some kind of, it will have some kind of Latin name as well. I don't know whether, no, I honestly don't know whether monkey puzzle is a kind of a colloquial name for it or whether it is the official name for it. I've just always known it as a monkey puzzle tree. They're not usually they're not native to the UK, that's for sure. They are imported from, and I don't know, again, whether that would be Asia or Africa or other parts of Europe, but it's certainly not native to Scotland. But, here, for whatever reason, I don't know how old this tree is, but it's obviously been there for a few decades. So it's called a monkey puzzle tree. So yes, if somebody else wants to Google it and come back with an answer, that's fine. Right, so where was I? Let's flip forward. Yes, now the other thing is, of course, like I say, to go to the shops. And sometimes what you can do is you can take so the shop windows, you might decide there's a particular one that you like, you take a shot of that, or in something like this case, I was quite struck by the difference. So I put these two side by side. I went, they're side, well, rather, they are side by side, and what struck me was the difference. So the Mad Hatter Cafe has gone full colourful bling kind of stuff. So it's colourful lights all around. They've got giant Christmas baubles. They created a little snow scene, I think, which has got like a sheet thrown over something and creatures. It's also just a bit of condensation on the inside, so it's not particularly clear. So they've gone for the bright and colourful. Next door to them is Burford Antiques, who've gone decidedly more restrained. Instead of, they've got a single wreath there, they've got much more subtle with the colours that they're doing. There's a general overall yellowy gold kind of glow to it, but they're not going for the that full kind of colour scheme that you've got over here. And so sometimes when you're out there with your camera, you're looking for the bits which are contrary to each other, sitting next to each other, but not necessarily natural bedfellows. So that can always be quite fun to be looking out for as well. Okay. Right, let me just minimise that for a moment because I can see a couple more comments have come in. Okay, Rebecca says it's an Oricaria arucana. I don't know my Latin pronunciations. Okay, that'll be the... Adrian says Wikipedia, also Aricaria. Look it up. Take a look at the comments. You can see how it's spelled. Commonly called the monkey puzzle tree, monkey tail tree, Piñonero, Puan, or Argentinian pine. Oh, Argentina, South America then. Right. Okay. April says, is the Mad Hatter Cafe good? Looks nice. It's one of several cafes in Castle Douglas. We have which have all got slightly different moods and feels to them, and what have you. So, given the fact that Castle Douglas, like I say, only has a population of about 3,000, it's got this one high street with at least half a dozen different cafes on it, 3 different butchers. There's a lot of food. It's virtually all small independent retailers, which is so unlike most towns today. Most towns are almost identical with their same kind of high street shops, which are all these kind of big chains. There's virtually no big chain shops in Castle Douglas. There is a Tesco up at the top. There's now an Aldi, I think, just recently opened last month. But it's just kind of on the edge of town. The actual high street itself doesn't have any of these, or hardly any of these. What else have we got? Adrian says, continued, it's the hardiest species in the conifer genus Araucaria. Becca says, I was taught you get spiked if you touch it, if accidentally, but if you grasp the branch firmly and then pull it, it behaves. Nick says it's native to Chile and Argentina. I can see everybody actually has gone off and is sort of busy tapping away in Wikipedia trying to find out all these answers, which on the one hand is fun, on the other hand it means you're taking your way. You should be watching me, listening to me. No, you are. This is great. This is fun. Susan says, VG, my son has one in his garden. It's definitely not conducive to tree hugging. The branches are extremely sharp and spiky. Sandra says, the decorations reflected in the two differences between the two shops. VG says, lovely shops. April says, this is awesome, independent places. John Harvey says, I expect I would really like Castle Douglas. I'm sure you would. It really is a great place to come to. In fact, actually, if we're on the subject of shops, then I do have to show you my favourite place, which some of you may well be familiar with, In-House Chocolates. In-House Chocolates does the most wonderful hot chocolate. So they make their own handmade chocolates. And so took a shot of this, and their current display, they've created this giant box of Christmas box of chocolates to sit in the window here. Now, something else for the real eagle-eyed among you may have noticed, if we go and take a little look through the door over here on the wall, you might recognise this picture. This picture being the 7 Deadly Sins of Chocolate, which is a photo shoot I did for In-House Chocolates just in the year before lockdown. And so that was done back in 2019. And in Christmas of 2019, they actually used this as their window display then. So this is the same window, and they took this shot, so this being the big shot that we did, and they created this entire, Gillian created this wonderful display. Part of the shot was you had all this chocolate on the table in front of each of the 7 deadly sins of chocolate, and then she extended this out in front with fruit and holly and decorations, what have you. So it all just kind of melded out into the window display, which was rather lovely. So basically then, what we're talking about, to kind of give a wee summary, to give a wee summary then, that essentially what we're looking at is the notion of after dark. After dark, this notion of the sun has gone down, what can we do? Now we can look at that, of what that might mean in the house. So like lighting a candle, switching lights on, particular kinds of lights which only come on. Maybe you've got lights in the window, you can see it getting darker outside. There's that notion of in just stepping into the garden, stepping outside the house. There's the idea of playing around with the blue hour when there's still light in the sky, but the lights, street lights, house lights, shop lights have started coming on. So that's a kind of a fun place to be as well. And what's going on there? No, that's all right. Sorry, I'm seeing something else happening on the screen that I wasn't expecting. Then there's the notion of... Sorry, I'm completely distracted there. Let me just stick that back up for a moment. So what we're talking about, this notion then of the blue hour is always a good one, interesting one, which is that after dark it's starting to get dark, lights are coming on. There's that notion of the high street. There's a notion of mist or fog at night. There's a notion of shop windows, festive lights, neighbours' houses. So there's all these different kind of options for you. So when we're talking about the After Dark challenge, I will accept anything that will loosely come under the idea of After Dark. But it is a festive season. There is lots of holidays going on. There's lots of lights going on. So play around. Back at the beginning, as I said, you might need to go for wider aperture, you might need to go for higher ISO, you might need to go for longer shutter speeds. But if there's enough light about, actually if you're in a town or a city which has a lot of lights, then you can probably get away with quite a lot that's actually handheld as well. And of course, don't forget to just, use your phone if you've got the opportunity. You have to see something interesting as well. So what I'm doing then is I'm setting the After Dark challenge for the 22nd of December. So 2 weeks today, 22nd of December, we will look through all the images that have been sent in. So try and get your images to me by the 20th of December. Okay, Friday the 20th of December, send me your images. So you've got 2 weeks to go out there, play around, get shots in your house, get shots outside, get shots when you next go shopping in the town or the city, go and explore your neighbours' gardens or yards or whatever, and have some fun. And then on the 22nd of December, we'll go through the images and it's kind of inspire each other. Okay, see how everybody's tackled it slightly differently, and see if we get any ideas from looking at other people's images. Okay, where should we? What else? So, Susan says it's her favourite chocolate shop too. Sandra thinks that would be her favourite shop, as she also loves chocolate. VG says, is that the one you photographed? Yes, that's the one. Oh, yes, referring to the 7 Deadly Sins of Chocolate. April says, congrats, Kim. Would have to get a hot chocolate there if I go to Scotland. Absolutely. If anybody makes their way to Scotland, anybody certainly makes their way to this corner of Scotland, then let me know and I will personally treat you to a hot chocolate at at In-House Chocolates. And so where are we? Oh, and Janet says, for the challenge, are we allowed to shoot early morning? The location I'm considering busy after work. I've confirmed that the lights are on overnight and I can park before 5 a.m. Yeah, absolutely. That's not a problem. Once you get to sun up, we're no longer after dark. So that wouldn't count. But if it's dark and I wouldn't know whether it was 5 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the evening, then yes, it can certainly count. Right, okay, so hopefully then that all makes sense. So we'll move on to the next topic. I'm aware that time's moved on faster than I expected it to, which is the notion of food photography. And for that matter, if we flip back to our 7 Deadly Sins of Chocolate, so this is the original full photo that then got printed up to sit inside In-House Chocolate's shop and window. And I've just pulled this one up as it seemed to be a nice kind of segue into the idea of, if you're doing food photography, there's a number of ways you can approach it. And one of the ways you can approach it is the idea of people and food. Okay, because generally speaking, food is something we are eating. The food is there not just to look pretty in its own right, but because it's about to be eaten. So whether that's you're sitting in a cafe, or you are sitting down to a meal with your family, or you are out with friends, or something like that. Another one of my kind of big setup photos, you may remember, some of you will remember, is this one, where it's not a full sit down dining meal, but there's bread and there's cheese and there's fruit. And that notion of, the point being is that very often with food you get the people gathering. So if we're talking about that idea of seasonal food particularly, is that notion of families, friends coming together with food. So that's one way you can approach it. You don't necessarily have to do a full kind of tableau Old Master style scene for it, but I'm just wanting at this point to open up your imagination to the idea of people and food. I mean, you can also have, for that matter, to go back to the 7 Deadly Sins style shoot, you can get people actually eating, whether it's a mince pie or a piece of chocolate, a chocolate Santa or something like that. Or you can have people's attitude towards food. You can have people looking at food. It may be if you're in a supermarket or something like that, or somebody's picking something off a shelf or looking at something with the intention of either they're about to eat it or maybe they're going to make something with it later. So there's that sort of way that you can approach the food photography as well. So thinking then about this idea of food can be in the context of people, and if it's in the context of people, what kind of context would that be? Would it be people drawn together and interacting around the food? Is it people interacting with the food? Is it about eating the food, doing something with the food, making something with the food, or just having an attitude or curiosity or thoughts about the food that they happen to be holding? So people and food is a great way of playing around with the idea of seasonal food. Another thing then is to actually go down the whole still life route. And I think this is a way a lot of us can do food, and certainly if, I mean, I say taking a photograph of people in a supermarket is possibly not a good idea. I would only really recommend that if the person you're taking the photo of is somebody you already know and they're okay with it. So maybe if you've got a partner or a grandchild or something like that, that's all right. I think taking photos of a complete stranger in the supermarket might even be against supermarket policy. You're not on public ground in a supermarket, bear in mind. Most places, it's fine to take a photograph of somebody in a public space if they're a stranger, as long as you are in a public space, like out on the street. But if you're in private property, then the people who own the property, they are the ones who can set the rules, and supermarkets might decide that they don't want, So also, I mean, I know I would feel quite uncomfortable if I'm picking something off a shelf and some complete stranger's photographing me. So generally speaking, don't be a jerk about it. But if you can arrange it with, a relative, a grandchild, a partner or something like that, and you could maybe do something like that. But anyway, back to this idea then, if you don't want to play, if you don't want to use people, if you don't want to interact with people, if that's just too complicated finding somebody else and setting it up, still life, this ability to play around with food in your own home. Okay, now if you're going to shoot in your own house, generally speaking, when you're doing food photography, if you're wanting to try and create some kind of three-dimensional sense of it, so lighting, you don't want to be lighting from the front. Mostly you want to be lighting from the side. Now, I brought this one out, again, some of you may remember when we did, I created this one for a much earlier podcast, 3, maybe 4 years ago, can't remember now. But this one is lit purely by the window. So I had a window light is coming from the left as we're looking at this shot, and because this was emulating an old master's style painting, and a lot of these kind of things generally tend to be lit either by candlelight or by window light, so I decided to use window light in this. I might have actually had a reflector, soft reflector, on the other side. If I look at in the edge of the jug here, it looks like there's something reflecting there. So I think possibly to just take the edge off the shadows, I wouldn't have had a full-on light, but I would have had a reflector. Now, another example of food photography where I was doing this was there's a restaurant just down the road called the Olive Retreat, where I've been doing food photography for a number of years for them. And when we set up for them, what I do is, this is more or less the setup. This is one of the earlier setups, but I've kind of gone with this each time over. I think this was just taken on my phone, showing what the setup is. So what I've done here is I've got a big softbox, and although they've got windows here, and the problem was that it was a dull day, there wasn't enough light coming through the windows. I wanted to have control over the light, so I used the softbox here, and so I've got my main light coming here. But what I've also done, we can see over on the right here, is I've got a reflector again, but I'm not using the silver side, I'm using the white side, because I want some bounce but not a huge amount of bounce of light. And then now this particular shot, I happen to be photographing part of their takeaway series, so there's a pizza in a box and some chips or fries and some olives and bits and pieces. But if I show you another kind of shot where we've got the same kind of setup, so this was done for one of their kind of desserts where we've got baklava or baklava, depending on, I've heard it pronounced both ways, with cream and a strawberry, and an espresso coffee and ground up pistachio nuts here sitting on a little wooden board. And you can see it's the same table we're using and the same setup. So I've got the big softbox up to the left. This is casting the main light. We're getting a bit of reflection in here, and a little bit of shadow here. But I've also got the reflector over on the right, which is bouncing a little bit of light back into here. But we've got depth with the shadow, but it's not kind of a really hard light. Everything's kind of soft. It's a large soft box which is giving soft shadows and a little bit of bounce coming back from the reflector. Now, when you're doing a shot like this, well, so we've got our lighting setup, but I just want to remind you that there's different ways you can photograph it. So this then is looking at about a 45 or maybe even a 30-degree angle. So we're just looking down at the food as though we were sitting down at the table. This is maybe what we would see, or how we would see it. But if you want to get creative, you can also stand about. At this point I stood on a chair, I've got the camera holding it directly overhead, and at this point it's much more about almost geometrical shapes. So it's food, but it's about shapes. It's where you're creating. We don't usually look at our food from this angle because we would have to be standing on a chair to look at it, and generally speaking when we're sitting at the table we're not standing on the chair, or if we are, our mother is shouting at us to get down and stop being silly. Or they're saying, hurry up, and then put the camera away so we can eat. But that notion of shooting directly down is another way that you can play around with it. So, and then there's the other idea, which is getting close, okay? Kind of macro level, just really zoom in, pick out a little part of the food that you've got and really getting close. And then very often these are the bits where it becomes almost most mouth-watering. So we get right in with, you can see the pistachio nuts on here. We can see a little bit of on the suddenly forgotten the word that you use for the top of the coffee. And this close in, you can practically smell the coffee, you can taste the baklava, so that notion of macro in with your still life is something that you can do as well. Comments, what have we got here? Oh, Sandra loved the series of chocolate photos. Vici says, great shots, Kim. Food makes people happy. It generally does, it's true. Marilyn says, lovely still life. April says, Scotland pizza. Would love to see what it tastes like. New York pizza is amazing. Well, I think Scotland, I don't know whether there's a specific Scottish pizza as such. There's so many, it all depends entirely on the outlet. The pizza varies considerably in quality and taste depending on where you happen to get it from. I will say though that the pizza down at the Olive Retreat is pretty good. I do enjoy it there. Sandra says, all these dessert photos make me feel hungry. Well, well, okay, a couple more then. You may also remember, some of you may remember as well, a couple of years ago, in fact, how long ago was this? 3 or 4? 2020, 4 years ago. Okay, almost exactly 4 years ago. I then did mince pie photos. So do you remember the mince pie photos? So this again showing how to play around with still life, and what I did here was, again, I've got a softbox, shallow depth of field, and I've already done the shallow depth of field. So we've got in the background with this, we've got bits of greenery. You can see you've got ivy leaves, little bits of pine needles and stuff in the background, little bits of pine tree. And then what we did was, in order to create the snow effect, is icing sugar. So icing sugar into a sieve, and then just tapping the side of the sieve allows the icing sugar to come down, gives you this nice snow effect. So you get a lot of fun with that. And we did 2 different kinds of shoot with the mince pies. We did this one we got the kind of green background and that kind of sense of the greenery, like the holly and the ivy kind of sense. And then we also went for this one where we played around much more with slightly moodier lighting. And in this case, what I did, I had the softbox, but then I also had a flash off to one side, not pointing directly at it, but just bouncing off the kitchen cupboards. But I put a blue gel into it, and you can see on the right side of these pictures there's a slight blue, and that adds real coolness to it. And then what I also did with this, we've gone from a wooden board to a grey slate, and I got some coloured Christmas fairy lights, put them in the background on, but again, shallow depth of field allows them to kind of bokeh up as such. And just again to show you quickly what that setup was like, so you can see before, this is obviously before the icing sugar got sprinkled on it, but you can see I've got a black background, I've got the the fairy lights there. There is, yes, there's the off-camera flash with a couple of bits ready to bounce, which I ended up putting a blue gel onto as well. And then here I've got the softbox lighting up. So that then allowed me to create this. And just one little thing, point of interest I discovered when we were doing this, was that if you're doing this kind of group of, in this case, mince pies, having one which has a bite out of it or an apparent bite out of it, so you can see the inside oozing out, always adds an extra little dimension to your food photography. Sandra says, oh yes, I remember these. Vigi says, 4 years is like yesterday. Marilyn says, lovely and clever mince pies. April says, neat looking. Okay, I'll show you a couple more food things, and then I'll kind of start summarising everything up. Another bit of fun thing that we did with the same mince pie on the same shoot as well, some of you may remember, was this one, where the mince pie is actually in the tray, and again, looking straight down from above. And the extra little bit of fun with this was the reindeer. Turned out Maggie had a little reindeer cookie cutter shape, and so with the pastry that had been made for the mince pies, with the leftover pastry, she used the cutter and made his little reindeer. And so we decided to have a little bit of fun, whereby we've got, essentially it's like having 4 reindeer running around it. We've got the cutter side of it. We've got this one here, or rather we've got 2 reindeer here. And then just around here, we've used the shadow. So obviously we had another one there to sprinkle the over the icing sugar over it, and then we removed it. So at this point then we're kind of playing with, you can look at it and then you can look at it again and keep finding extra little details and fun to have with it. So you could explore and you can play. Finally then, what I want to move on to, I literally remembered about this only an hour or so before the podcast. I had to run through my files and find it. But about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I did a photo shoot for Dumfries and Galloway Life magazine of Renita, a friend of mine who's a minister's wife, and she had done she had done a nativity scene made of gingerbread and chocolate, so an edible nativity scene. And this image then went into the magazine. It was all part of the Christmas setup. And again, we've got Christmas lights dotted around the kitchen. But actually, although I say this was taken on the 1st of November, so we had to set up lights because obviously we needed to get the picture in to get into the December issue. And it was a very, very tight deadline, this one. But we just managed to kind of squeeze it in. Renita was great. And to show you a little bit more close up then, this was the nativity scene. All of it completely edible, so bits of pastry, bits of marzipan, shreddies, icing sugar, little kind of crumbly bits and pieces. Edible Jesus. Heresy? Blasphemy? Fun? Never entirely sure. But however, Renita, like I say, the minister's wife of the church just around where she lived. So I always figured, well, if she was fine with it, then I wasn't going to say anything. Sheep made from marshmallows. We've even got a camel and a wise man and a donkey, cattle. In fact, she even went for a Galloway belty. There's a particular kind of cow around here, they're known as Galloway belties. Basically, it's a black cow with a big white band around the middle. And so she sneaked that one into the edible festive scene as well. So that was kind of fun. So there we go. So in terms of food then, to give you this kind of summary of food, if we're talking about food, particularly seasonal food, obviously there are particular things that come out this time of year, but then what we're talking about is how do you make sure the food looks sort of seasonal? And that might be, maybe the food is just like any other food, but it's the background that's giving, the fact that there are decorations and there are twinkly lights. Maybe you want to emulate a bit of snow with a little bit of icing sugar being tapped out of a sieve full it, dripping over everything. Or not dripping, that's the wrong word. Floating, dropping over it. Maybe you want to involve people. Maybe you want to have the way people gather around food, exchange food, have an attitude towards food, eat food. Perhaps you want to play around with still life. Perhaps you want to create stories within the way you shaped the food. Don't forget that you can shoot it from the angle you would normally look at it, but you can change the angle. You can shoot from above, you can shoot from side on, you can shoot macro, you can get right in amongst the details. There's plenty of different ways. So on the back of that then, on the 29th of December, so between Christmas and New Year, on that particular podcast, we are having the Seasonal Food Challenge. So you've got 3 weeks then to play around to get your seasonal food challenge. If you want to leave it as late as Christmas Day, that's fine. But on the 27th of, try and get the images to me by the 27th of December. So that'll be the Friday, so that I've got time to gather them all together. I'll probably be able to take something on the 28th, but certainly don't leave it to the Sunday. But ideally get it to me on the Friday. So this is it then. Our run up then over the next few weeks for the rest of December. What we have is next week is a feedback session. Okay, so we've got a feedback session next week. Now I've already had 2 people send me in images already. Nadia has sent me something and Naria has sent me something. So I have the space for 2, maybe 3 more images, but that's it. So if you want to get your image in for a feedback session, then make sure you send that to me this week, and it will be on a first come first serve basis. So if the earlier you get it in, the more chance I can use yours. Don't forget, you get a bonus 25 smug points if I use your image for the feedback session. So a chance for you to get genuine feedback on one of your images, whether you're wanting to put that image, this might be an image that you're planning on putting into some kind of photo competition later on, and you want to make sure you haven't missed anything, whether it's something you're trying to attempt and you've got stuck on and you could really do with a little bit of help working out what you could have done differently, or whether you've got something and you know it would work just a little bit better if you polished it in a particular way, but you're kind of coming a bit unstuck. Either way, send me the image or put it into the Facebook group. The Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, and let me know what your sticking point is, and I will do my best to help you. So next week then, on the 15th, that is a feedback session. The following week, on the 22nd of December, that's when we're having our After Dark challenge, so make sure you get me your images before the 20th. After Dark, all everything we've talked about. 29th of December then is the Seasonal Food Challenge. That's the bit whether you want to make yourself a nativity scene out of gingerbread, or you want to do any of the things we've just been talking about, then that's for the 29th. Get your images to me by the 27th. And then, just to give you a little reminder as well, that on the 5th of January, we will be doing our Best of 2024. Okay, so images into me before the 3rd of January for that one. But really at that point then, I'll remind you again of this as we get closer to it, but start having a think about what's been your favourite image, either your best image because it's, in terms of, well, however you decide to define it. Is it because it's the one that's most meaningful to you? Is it the one that's won the most accolades? Is it the one you had the best feedback on? Whatever it is, we're going to really celebrate 2024 as we get into January and show off our best photos of the year. So you can send me a photo for that. So keep an eye out for that one. Right. Okay, so just a quick little reminder, if you happen to find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. Don't forget as well to like this video and subscribe and share with your friends and invite all your friends along and all that kind of stuff as well. Right, last couple of comments here. What have we got? Becca says going to have to dash, but lots of food for thought. I see what you did there. April says, what a cute nativity scene. Adrian says, love the mini marshmallows making the sheep's coat. Sandra says, great idea for festive food. Fiji says, cute camel and sheep. And then pretty much everybody saying cheerio and goodbye. Right, so look forward to seeing you all next week for the feedback challenge. Don't forget to send you in your images, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. Take care. Bye bye. Oh, that's not the one that I was going for.